The mirror reflected a vision of happiness that would soon shatter into 1,000 pieces. Serah stood in the bridal preparation room, adjusting the delicate white dress her grandmother had sewn with trembling but loving hands. The lace sleeves hugged her brown skin perfectly, and the pearl buttons running down her back caught the afternoon light streaming through the windows. Today was supposed to be the beginning of her forever with Marcus, the man she had loved for 3 years. Her bridesmaids fussed around her, fixing her hair and adding final touches to her makeup, their excited chatter filling the small room with energy. Serah's hands shook slightly as she held her bouquet of white roses and baby's breath. She had dreamed of this day since she was a little girl playing dress-up in her mother's curtains, and now it was finally here. The wedding hall down the corridor buzzed with guests arriving, music playing softly, and the sweet smell of flowers everywhere. Everything seemed perfect, like a fairy tale coming true right before her eyes. But fairy tales sometimes hide monsters in beautiful disguises. Serah's cousin, Monica, was supposed to help her with the final veil adjustment, but Monica had disappeared 20 minutes ago, saying she needed to check something with the wedding coordinator. Serah thought nothing of it then. She trusted Monica completely. They had grown up together like sisters, sharing secrets and dreams under blanket forts when they were children. As the clock ticked closer to the ceremony start time, Serah decided to peek into the main hall to see how the decorations looked. She wanted just one glimpse before walking down that aisle. Her heart pounded with excitement as she lifted her dress slightly to avoid tripping and walked quietly down the hallway in her white satin shoes. The corridor leading to the main wedding hall had a small side entrance that the staff used, and Serah headed toward it, her veil trailing behind her like a cloud. She could hear music playing, guests laughing, and someone testing the microphone. Everything sounded joyful and ready. Then Serah heard something else, a sound that made her freeze in place like a statue. It was Marcus's voice, coming from a small room beside the main hall where the groom was supposed to wait before the ceremony. But Marcus wasn't alone, and he wasn't talking. Serah's stomach twisted into knots as she heard sounds that made her blood run cold. Giggling, whispers, the unmistakable sounds of kissing. Her brain refused to believe what her ears were telling her. Maybe she was wrong. The flowers slipped from Serah's hands and hit the floor with a soft thud. That tiny sound made Marcus and Monica jump apart like they had been burned. Marcus's face went pale as snow when he saw Serah standing there in her wedding dress, tears already streaming down her carefully made-up face. Monica's lipstick was smeared, and her bridesmaid dress was wrinkled. For a terrible moment, nobody spoke. The only sound was Serah's ragged breathing as she tried to process what she was seeing. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again like a fish gasping for air. Monica, at least, had the decency to look ashamed, but she didn't say she was sorry. Instead, she straightened her dress and looked away. Marcus finally found his voice, but the words that came out made everything worse instead of better. He didn't apologize. He didn't beg for forgiveness. Instead, he said the cruelest thing Serah had ever heard in her entire life. Marcus looked at Serah with cold eyes and said that he had never really loved her the way a man should love his wife. He said he had only stayed with her because she was convenient and kind, always doing things for him and making his life comfortable. He said that Monica understood him better, made him feel more alive, and that he had been seeing her for 6 months already. 6 whole months of lies and betrayal while Serah planned their wedding, picked out flowers, tasted cakes, and dreamed of their future together. Monica finally spoke up, her voice quiet but cutting like a knife.
She said that she and Marcus had fallen in love and couldn't help themselves. She said that Serah would understand someday when she found real love. The audacity of those words, spoken while wearing the bridesmaid dress Serah had paid for, made Serah's sadness transform into something else entirely. But she didn't yell or scream or throw things like people do in movies. Instead, something inside Serah simply went numb and cold. Without saying a single word, Serah turned around and walked away from that room, leaving her bouquet scattered on the floor. She walked past the confused wedding coordinator, who asked if everything was okay. She walked past her bridesmaids, who called her name with worried voices. She walked straight out of the wedding hall into the Seoul afternoon, still wearing her wedding dress and veil, her vision blurred by tears that wouldn't stop falling. Behind her, she could hear commotion starting as people realized something was terribly wrong. She heard her mother's voice calling her name, heard guests whispering in confusion, heard someone asking where the bride was going. But Serah didn't stop. She couldn't stop. If she stopped moving, she would collapse right there on the ground and never get up again. So she walked and walked, her white dress getting dirty at the hem as she stumbled down streets she barely recognized through her tears. The afternoon turned into evening, and the sky began to darken with heavy clouds that promised rain. Serah had been walking for over an hour, completely lost in a neighborhood she didn't know. Her feet hurt in the satin shoes, her face was streaked with ruined makeup, and her heart felt like it had been ripped out of her chest and stomped on repeatedly. Other people on the street stared at her like she was a ghost or something from a strange dream. A woman in a wedding dress wandering alone through the city was not something you saw every day. Some people looked concerned and asked if she needed help, but Serah just shook her head and kept walking. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew she couldn't go back to that wedding hall, couldn't face all those people who had come to celebrate what turned out to be the biggest lie of her life. The first raindrops began to fall, slowly at first, then faster and harder, until the sky opened up completely and rain poured down in sheets.
Serah stood in the middle of a crosswalk, rain soaking through her dress and veil, completely and utterly lost. Cars honked at her to move, but her legs felt like they were made of stone. She looked up at the dark sky and let the rain mix with her tears, wondering how her perfect day had turned into such a nightmare. Why wasn't she enough for Marcus? What had she done wrong? How could Monica, her own cousin who she had trusted with everything, betray her so completely? The questions circled in her mind like angry birds with no answers to calm them down. Suddenly, bright headlights blinded her, and a black car screeched to a stop just inches from where she stood frozen in the crosswalk. The car was expensive-looking and shiny despite the rain, the kind of vehicle that important people rode in. Serah expected the driver to yell at her for standing in the road like a fool, but instead, the back window rolled down slowly. A man's face appeared in the window, and even through her tears in the rain, Serah could see that he was handsome in a sharp, serious way. He had dark eyes that seemed to see everything, black hair styled neatly, and he wore an expensive suit that probably cost more than Serah made in 6 months at the flower shop. But what caught Serah's attention most was that he was sitting in a wheelchair inside the car, specially modified to accommodate it. The man looked at Serah with an expression that was hard to read, not angry, not pitying, just intensely curious and maybe a little concerned. When he spoke, his voice was deep and calm, the kind of voice that made you listen even when you didn't want to. He asked Serah if she was trying to hurt herself by standing in the middle of traffic in the rain.
He said that if she wanted to live, she should get in the car before she caught pneumonia or got hit by a less careful driver. His words were blunt, but not unkind, and something about his tone cut through the fog of Serah's misery. Serah should have been scared. Her mother had always warned her never to get into cars with strangers, especially in a big city like Seoul, where anything could happen. But in that moment, soaking wet and heartbroken, Serah didn't care about danger or safety or anything except getting out of the rain and away from the pain crushing her chest. So she opened the car door and climbed inside, her wet dress dripping all over the expensive leather seats. The man didn't comment on the mess. Instead, he handed Serah a soft towel that had been sitting on the seat beside him and told his driver to take them somewhere warm and dry. The car began to move smoothly through the rainy streets, and Serah sat there shivering, hugging herself and trying to stop crying, but failing completely. The man in the wheelchair didn't ask questions or make small talk. He just let her cry in peace while the car glided through Seoul's nighttime traffic, the city lights blurring past the windows like colorful tears. After about 15 minutes, the car pulled up in front of a small but elegant cafe that looked warm and inviting through its glowing windows. The driver helped the man with his wheelchair, and then the man gestured for Serah to follow him inside. The cafe was nearly empty, just a few customers quietly reading or typing on laptops in corners. The smell of coffee and fresh pastries filled the air, and soft jazz music played from hidden speakers. The man wheeled himself to a private table in the back and asked Serah to sit down. He ordered hot chocolate for her without asking what she wanted, and also ordered soup and bread because he said she looked like she hadn't eaten all day. He was right. Serah had been too nervous and excited about the wedding to...
Finally, Serah found her voice, even though it came out scratchy and broken. She told this stranger everything, because sometimes it's easier to confess your pain to someone who doesn't know you than to people who do. She told him about Marcus and how they had met at university when she was studying business and he was studying engineering. She told him about their 3 years together, about how Marcus had proposed to her on a beach at sunset with a ring he had saved up for months to buy. She told him about planning the wedding, about how excited she had been, about the dress her grandmother made while fighting arthritis in her hands because she wanted her granddaughter to have something special. Then Serah told him about walking down that hallway and finding Marcus with Monica, about the cruel words Marcus had said, about how her cousin had looked at her with eyes that held no real guilt. She told him about walking out of the wedding hall and wandering the streets in the rain like a ghost haunting her own broken dreams. By the time she finished talking, Serah's hot chocolate was cold and fresh tears were rolling down her cheeks. The man listened to everything without interrupting once. When Serah finally fell silent, he set down his coffee cup and looked at her with those sharp, intelligent eyes. He introduced himself as Kim Ha-joon, and he said he understood betrayal and pain more than she might think. Then Ha-joon did something Serah never expected. He made her an offer that would change both of their lives forever. Ha-joon explained that he came from a very wealthy and powerful family that ran one of the biggest companies in South Korea. His family was traditional and strict, with many rules about honor and duty and appearances. 2 years ago, Ha-joon had been in a terrible car accident that left him unable to walk. Since then, certain members of his family had been whispering that he was too weak to lead the family business when his father retired. They said a man in a wheelchair couldn't command respect or make tough decisions. They wanted to push him aside and give his position to his cousin Jin-woo, who was ambitious and cruel and everything Ha-joon despised.
Ha-joon's father had told him that if he wanted to prove he was still strong and capable, he needed to show stability by getting married and starting a family. But Ha-joon had no interest in the women his family kept introducing him to, shallow people who only cared about money and status. Then Ha-joon looked directly at Serah and said something that made her heart stop. He said that he needed a wife to satisfy his family's demands and secure his position as the future company leader. Serah needed to show her ex-boyfriend and her terrible cousin that she was strong, successful, and completely fine without them. Ha-joon proposed a deal. They would get married quickly, live together for appearances, and help each other achieve their goals. He would get his family off his back and keep his position in the company. She would get revenge by showing Marcus that she had moved on to someone far better, someone richer and more powerful than Marcus could ever dream of being. After a year or so, when everything settled down, they could quietly divorce and go their separate ways. No real feelings involved, just a business arrangement that benefited them both. Ha-joon made it sound so simple and logical, like he was proposing a merger between two companies instead of a marriage between two people. Sarah's first instinct was to laugh at the absurdity of the idea. Marry a complete stranger out of revenge? It sounded like something from a television drama, not real life. But as she sat there in her ruined wedding dress, thinking about Marcus and Monica probably laughing at her right now, thinking about facing all those wedding guests and explaining what happened, thinking about going home to her small apartment alone to cry herself to sleep for weeks or months or maybe years, Ha-joon's crazy proposal started to sound less crazy.
After what felt like an hour, but was probably only a few minutes, Serah took a deep breath and made a choice that terrified and thrilled her at the same time. She agreed to Ha-joon's proposal. She would marry him, not for love, but for revenge and survival, and a chance to prove that she was stronger than the pain trying to destroy her. Ha-joon nodded once, satisfied, and they shook hands across the table like business partners sealing a deal. He told her that they would get married in 3 days at a courthouse. Nothing fancy or romantic, just the legal paperwork that would make them husband and wife in the eyes of the law. Then Serah would move into his house, meet his family, and play the role of devoted wife whenever necessary. In private, they would be polite roommates, living separate lives. Ha-joon promised to treat her with respect and make sure she had everything she needed materially. In return, Serah promised to support him publicly and help him maintain the image of a stable, married man, ready to lead his family's empire. As they left the cafe together that rainy night, Serah riding in Ha-joon's expensive car toward a guest room in his house where she would stay until the wedding, she felt like she was stepping into a completely different life, leaving behind the girl who had believed in fairy tale endings. 3 days passed in a blur of legal paperwork and practical arrangements. Serah signed documents she barely read, her hand moving automatically across papers that would bind her to a man she hardly knew. Ha-joon was efficient and organized, handling everything with the smooth competence of someone used to making important decisions quickly. On the 3rd day, they stood in a courthouse office with only Ha-joon's lawyer and 1 assistant as witnesses. Serah wore a simple cream-colored dress she had bought the day before, nothing like the elaborate wedding gown that now sat crumpled in a bag somewhere in her old apartment. Ha-joon wore a dark suit and looked calm and composed, like getting married was just another item to check off his daily to-do list. The ceremony took less than 15 minutes. They exchanged plain silver rings that Ha-joon had purchased that morning, spoke the required words, signed the final papers, and just like that, Serah became Mrs. Kim. No flowers, no music, no guests throwing rice or taking pictures, just signatures and stamps and a legal document that changed everything. When it was over, Ha-joon's driver took them to Ha-joon's house, which Serah now supposed was her house too, at least temporarily.
The house was more like a mansion, 3 stories of modern architecture tucked behind high walls and security gates in one of Seoul's most expensive neighborhoods. Serah had never seen anything like it except in magazines. The floors were polished marble, the ceilings were high and decorated with elegant light fixtures, and every room seemed designed by someone with perfect taste and unlimited money. Ha-joon showed Serah to her bedroom on the 2nd floor, a spacious room with its own bathroom, walk-in closet, and balcony overlooking a beautiful garden. He explained that his room was down the hall, and they would maintain separate spaces to avoid awkwardness. There was a housekeeper named Mrs. Park who came every day to cook and clean, and a security team that monitored the property at all times. Ha-joon told Serah she was free to go anywhere in the house and use anything she wanted. His credit card was hers to use for clothes, food, or whatever she needed. The only rule was that when his family visited, or when they attended public events together, they had to act like a real married couple who cared about each other. Serah agreed, though the thought of pretending to be in love made her stomach twist uncomfortably.
The first 2 weeks of living in Ha-joon's house was strange and lonely, despite being surrounded by luxury. Serah spent her days exploring the enormous house, reading books from Ha-joon's impressive library, and walking through the garden that was filled with flowers she recognized from working at the flower shop. Ha-joon was busy with work most of the time, leaving early in the morning and returning late at night. When they did see each other, their conversations were polite but distant, like friendly acquaintances sharing an apartment rather than a married couple sharing a home. They ate meals separately, slept in different rooms, and lived completely independent lives under the same roof. Serah sometimes wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. She had escaped the pain of Marcus's betrayal, but she had trapped herself in a cold, empty arrangement that felt more like a prison than a marriage. At night, lying alone in her big, comfortable bed, Serah sometimes cried for the dreams she had lost and the love she had believed in that turned out to be fake. She wondered if she would ever feel warm inside again, or if her heart had frozen permanently on that rainy night when everything fell apart. But slowly, small things began to change in ways Serah didn't expect. One morning, she woke up early and decided to explore the garden more carefully. That's when she saw Ha-joon outside, sitting in his wheelchair near a bird feeder, completely still and quiet. She watched from the window as birds landed fearlessly on his shoulders and hands, eating seeds he offered them. His face, usually so serious and guarded, looked peaceful and almost happy. Serah realized there was more to Ha-joon than the cold businessman he pretended to be. Another day, she accidentally discovered that Ha-joon volunteered at a children's hospital every Saturday afternoon. He read stories to sick kids and played games with them, never mentioning his family name or wealth, just being a kind presence in their difficult lives. The hospital staff clearly loved him, and the children's faces lit up when he arrived. Ha-joon did this secretly, never telling anyone, never seeking credit or praise. Serah began to see that the man she had married for convenience and revenge was actually someone with a gentle heart hidden beneath layers of protection. Serah also started noticing how hard Ha-joon worked despite the challenges his disability created. She saw him pushing through pain during physical therapy sessions he did at home, determined to strengthen his legs, even though doctors had said he might never walk again. She overheard phone conversations where family members said dismissive or cruel things about his capabilities, and she watched him handle their disrespect with dignity and quiet strength. Ha-joon never complained or showed weakness, but Serah could see the toll it took on him. She found herself wanting to help him somehow,
to show him the same kindness he showed to sick children and hungry birds. So Serah started doing small things. She learned Ha-joon's favorite foods from Mrs. Park and sometimes cooked them herself, remembering recipes her grandmother had taught her. She organized his home office when she noticed papers piling up in messy stacks. She started joining him for breakfast in the mornings, and their awkward silences gradually filled with actual conversations about books, music, childhood memories, and dreams they had almost forgotten. One evening, Serah made kimchi stew using a recipe she had found in one of Ha-joon's grandmother's old cookbooks. She wasn't sure if it would taste right because Korean cooking was still new to her, but she wanted to try. When Ha-joon came home that night, tired from a difficult day of meetings, he smelled the stew and his expression changed completely. He asked if Serah had made it, and when she nodded nervously, he wheeled himself to the dining table quickly. Serah served him a bowl and waited anxiously while he took the first bite. For a long moment, Ha-joon didn't say anything. Then his serious face softened and he smiled. It was the first real smile Serah had seen from Ha-joon, warm and genuine and absolutely beautiful. He told her it tasted exactly like his grandmother's recipe, the food he had eaten as a child when things were simpler and happier. He thanked Serah with such sincerity in his voice.
After that night, things shifted between them in ways neither had planned. They started spending more time together, not because the marriage contract required it, but because they genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Ha-joon told Serah stories about growing up in his strict family, about the pressure to be perfect, and the loneliness and never feeling good enough. Serah told Ha-joon about her childhood in a small neighborhood where everyone knew everyone, about her grandmother who raised her when her parents worked multiple jobs, about her dreams of someday opening her own flower shop where she could create beauty for people celebrating life's important moments. They discovered they both loved old movies, especially romantic comedies from decades ago that felt innocent and hopeful. They started watching them together on Friday nights, sitting on the same couch with popcorn between them, arguing playfully about which endings were realistic and which were pure fantasy. Ha-joon had a dry sense of humor that made Serah laugh until her stomach hurt, and Serah had a way of seeing the bright side of things that made Ha-joon's heavy burdens feel a little lighter. One particularly difficult day, Ha-joon had to attend a family business meeting where his cousin Jin-woo openly challenged his authority in front of the entire board. Jin-woo made cruel comments about Ha-joon's wheelchair, suggesting that someone who couldn't walk couldn't possibly have the strength to lead a major company. He brought up the fact that Ha-joon had suddenly married a woman nobody knew, implying it was a desperate move to appear stable. Other family members who were loyal to Jin-woo joined in, their questions and comments designed to humiliate and undermine Ha-joon's position. Ha-joon handled it professionally, his face a mask of calm control, but Serah could see the anger and hurt in his eyes when he returned home that evening. She found him in his study, staring out the window with his jaw clenched tight. Without thinking, Serah walked over and gently placed her hand on his shoulder. She told him that Jin-woo and all those other people were wrong, that being in a wheelchair didn't make him weak, that she had seen his real strength in how he treated children at the hospital, how he worked twice as hard as anyone else, how he faced disrespect with dignity instead of bitterness. Ha-joon looked up at Serah with surprise and something else in his eyes, something warm and grateful that made her heart beat faster. He reached up and covered her hand, and they stayed like that for a long moment, connected by touch and understanding. Ha-joon thanked her for defending him, saying that nobody had ever stood up for him the way she just had. He said that most people either pitied him or dismissed him, but Serah saw him as a complete person, worthy of respect.
The walls between them were crumbling quickly now, replaced by something neither of them had expected when they made their practical arrangement. Serah realized with shock that she looked forward to seeing Ha-joon every day, that her heart felt light when he smiled, that she cared deeply about his happiness and pain. These feelings terrified her because they weren't part of the plan. She had promised herself never to be vulnerable again, never to trust her heart to someone who could break it. But Ha-joon wasn't Marcus. He was nothing like Marcus, and the more time Serah spent with him, the harder it became to remember why she was supposed to keep her distance. Ha-joon was fighting his own battle with unexpected feelings. He had married Serah purely for practical reasons, expecting nothing more than a polite roommate who would help him maintain appearances. But Serah had brought light and warmth into his cold, lonely house. She made him laugh when he had forgotten how. She saw past his disability to the person underneath. She cared about him in ways that felt genuine and pure, not motivated by money or status or obligation. Ha-joon found himself thinking about Serah constantly, noticing little things like how she hummed while arranging flowers, how she always said good morning with a bright smile even when she was tired, how she had a habit of reading with her legs tucked under her like a child. He caught himself looking forward to coming home instead of dreading it, hoping that Serah would join him for dinner so they could talk. These feelings confused and worried Ha-joon because he had told himself after the accident that he would never burden someone with a relationship with a disabled man. He believed he had nothing to offer a woman except money and problems. But Serah made him feel like he was more than his wheelchair, more than his family's expectations, more than the accident that had changed his life.
The turning point came on a warm spring evening when Ha-joon surprised Serah with something he'd been planning for weeks. He asked her to dress nicely, but wouldn't tell her why, his eyes sparkling with a secret. Serah put on a pretty lavender dress and followed Ha-joon to the rooftop of his house. She'd never been to the rooftop before, and when the elevator doors opened, Serah gasped at what she saw. Ha-joon had transformed the entire rooftop into a magical garden. There were flowers everywhere in pots and planters, every color imaginable, creating a rainbow of blooms. String lights hung overhead like stars, creating a warm, golden glow as the sun set. There was a small fountain in the center, with water trickling peacefully, and comfortable chairs arranged around it. The view of Seoul spread out below them, the city lights beginning to twinkle as darkness fell. It was the most beautiful thing Serah had ever seen, like something from the dreams she used to have before everything went wrong. Ha-joon wheeled himself beside Serah and watched her face as she took in the rooftop garden. He told her that he had created this space specifically for her, remembering how she had talked about her love of flowers and her dream of having her own shop someday. He said that she had brought so much beauty into his dark world, and he wanted to give her something beautiful in return. He pointed out different flowers and explained why he had chosen each one. Roses for strength, lilies for hope, sunflowers for joy, and jasmine for grace. Every flower represented something he admired about Serah, something she had brought into his life. As Ha-joon spoke, Serah felt tears gathering in her eyes, but these were different from the tears she had cried on her broken wedding day. These were tears of happiness and something deeper, something that felt dangerously close to love. Serah looked at Ha-joon, really looked at him, and saw a man who had paid attention to her words, remembered her dreams, and worked hard to create something meaningful just to make her smile. Nobody had ever done anything like this for her before. Serah's voice shook when she finally spoke. She told Ha-joon that the garden was perfect and that he didn't have to do such things for her since their marriage was just an arrangement. But even as she said the words, they felt wrong and dishonest.
Ha-joon reached out and gently took her hand, his touch sending warmth through her entire body. He said that maybe their marriage had started as an arrangement, but somewhere along the way, something had changed for him. He said that Serah had become the best part of his days, that her smile made him happy in ways money and success never could, that he thought about her constantly and cared about her deeply. Ha-joon admitted that he was falling in love with her, maybe had already fallen, and he understood if she didn't feel the same way, but he couldn't keep pretending his feelings didn't exist. His confession hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable and terrifying. Serah's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst right out of her chest. She had been fighting her own feelings for weeks, telling herself it was impossible to love again after being hurt so badly. But looking at Ha-joon now, seeing the hope and fear mixed in his expression, Serah couldn't lie anymore. She told Ha-joon the truth. She said that she had been scared to admit it even to herself, but she was falling in love with him too. She said that he made her feel safe and valued and beautiful, not despite her broken heart, but including all her broken pieces. She said that when she thought about her future, she couldn't imagine it without him in it. Ha-joon's face transformed with joy, and he pulled Serah closer until she was standing right in front of his wheelchair. He reached up and gently cupped her face with both hands, his thumbs brushing away the happy tears on her cheeks. Then Ha-joon asked if he could kiss her, not as part of their fake marriage performance, but as two people who genuinely cared for each other. Serah could only nod because words had completely left her. Ha-joon guided her face down to his, and their lips met in a kiss that was soft and sweet and full of promise. It was nothing like the
Standing in that rooftop garden kissing Ha-joon felt like the beginning of something real and beautiful. But Serah should have known that happiness built on secrets never lasts long without consequences. For the next few weeks, Serah and Ha-joon existed in a perfect bubble of growing love and deepening connection. They stopped sleeping in separate rooms, though they maintained appropriate boundaries because Ha-joon respected Serah and wanted to do things properly. They held hands constantly, stole kisses when Mrs. Park wasn't looking, and talked about everything from silly childhood memories to serious hopes for the future. Ha-joon even began to open up about his accident, something he never discussed with anyone. He told Serah about the rainy night 2 years ago when a drunk driver had crashed into his car, about waking up in the hospital unable to feel his legs, about the dark months of depression when he wished he had died instead of survived as someone he saw as broken. Serah listened without pity or sadness, just compassion and understanding. She told Ha-joon that his accident didn't define him any more than Marcus's betrayal defined her, that they were both more than the worst things that had happened to them. Ha-joon started including Serah in more aspects of his life. He brought her to business dinners where she charmed his associates with her genuine kindness and quick intelligence. He introduced her to the children at the hospital, and they loved her immediately because she knew how to talk to them like real people instead of fragile objects. Serah started learning Korean cooking more seriously, taking lessons from Mrs. Park and surprising Ha-joon with new dishes. She also began working on a business plan for her dream flower shop, and Ha-joon helped her, offering advice about locations and financing and marketing. They talked about the future like it was something they would share together, forgetting entirely that their marriage had an expiration date. Everything seemed perfect until the past came back to destroy their happiness in the cruelest way possible. The explosion happened at Ha-joon's biggest family business meeting of the year, where the board would vote on whether Ha-joon or Jin-woo would become the next CEO when Ha-joon's father retired in 6 months. Jin-woo had been suspiciously quiet for weeks, and now Serah and Ha-joon understood why. He had been gathering ammunition to destroy Ha-joon's credibility in one devastating strike. At the meeting, in front of 20 board members, company executives, and family elders, Jin-woo stood up with a folder full of documents and a smile like a snake. He announced that he had discovered something very interesting about Ha-joon's sudden marriage. According to Jin-woo's private investigator, Serah had been left at the altar by another man on the exact same day she married Ha-joon. The investigator had found witnesses from the failed wedding, had copies of the wedding invitations with another man's name, and had even tracked down people who saw Serah wandering Seoul in a wedding dress before disappearing. Jin-woo presented all this evidence with dramatic flair, suggesting that Ha-joon's marriage was obviously fake, arranged in desperation to satisfy the family's demands for stability. He implied that Ha-joon had probably paid Serah to marry him, that she was nothing more than an actress playing a role, and that if Ha-joon had to resort to such deception, he clearly wasn't fit to lead the company. The conference room erupted in shocked whispers and accusing stares. Ha-joon's father looked disappointed and angry. Family members who had been neutral before now looked at Ha-joon with suspicion and disgust. Serah felt like she was drowning, unable to breathe as everyone's eyes turned to her with judgment and contempt. She wanted to defend herself and Ha-joon, wanted to explain that yes, the marriage had started as an arrangement, but had become something real and precious. But before she could speak, Jin-woo delivered his final blow. He said that Ha-joon's desperation proved what everyone had been thinking for 2 years. A man who couldn't walk, who had to resort to hiring a fake wife, who couldn't even be honest with his own family, was too weak and pathetic to run a company. Jin-woo's words were designed to humiliate and destroy, and they were working. Serah saw the pain and humiliation on Ha-joon's face, saw him retreating back into the cold, closed-off person he had been when they first met. She couldn't let this happen. She couldn't let Jin-woo win and destroy the man she loved. But before Serah could jump to Ha-joon's defense, something incredible happened. Ha-joon's hands gripped the armrests of his wheelchair, and slowly, with visible effort and determination, he stood up, actually stood up on his 2 legs. The entire room went silent with shock. For months, Ha-joon had been secretly working with a physical therapist, pushing his body beyond what doctors said was possible, building strength in his damaged legs through painful daily sessions he never mentioned to anyone. He had been waiting for the right moment to reveal his progress, and Jin-woo had just given him that moment. Ha-joon stood tall, his legs shaking slightly but holding firm, and he looked Jin-woo directly in the eyes. The power dynamic in the room shifted immediately. Ha-joon was no longer the disabled man in the wheelchair who people pitied or dismissed. He was a strong leader who had overcome incredible obstacles through sheer willpower and determination.
Ha-joon's voice was steady and powerful as he addressed the entire room. He admitted that yes, his marriage to Serah had begun as an arrangement of convenience. He had needed a wife to satisfy family expectations, and Serah had needed an escape from a painful situation. He didn't hide from the truth or make excuses. But then Ha-joon said something that made Serah's heart soar. He said that while their marriage might have started as a business deal, it had become the most real and important thing in his life. He said that Serah had given him reasons to keep fighting when he wanted to give up, that she had seen his value when others only saw his limitations, that she had loved him not for his money or his family name, but for the person he was inside. Ha-joon declared that Serah was his wife in every way that mattered, and he loved her completely. He said that if the family couldn't accept that, if they would choose Jin-woo's cruelty over his honesty, then he didn't want to be CEO anyway, because leading people who valued deception over truth was not worth the price of his dignity or his marriage. The room stayed silent as Ha-joon's words sank in. Then, surprisingly, Ha-joon's grandmother stood up from her seat. She was a tiny, elegant woman in her 80s who rarely spoke at business meetings, but whose opinion carried enormous weight in the family. She looked at Ha-joon standing there on his own legs, at Serah with tears streaming down her face, and at Jin-woo with his folder of accusations. Then Ha-joon's grandmother spoke in a clear, firm voice. She said that she had watched Ha-joon grow from a boy into a man, had seen him face tragedy with courage, and had noticed the change in him since marrying Serah. She said that a true leader wasn't someone who never fell down, but someone who got back up, and Ha-joon had literally done exactly that. She said that love was love, regardless of how it started, and she could see with her own eyes that Ha-joon and Serah loved each other genuinely. Ha-joon's grandmother turned to Jin-woo and said that a man who won through cruelty and humiliation was not the kind of leader their family needed. Then she cast her vote for Ha-joon to become the next CEO, and one by one, other family members followed her lead, until Ha-joon had won the vote decisively. Jin-woo's face turned purple with rage as his plan collapsed completely. He tried to argue, tried to bring up more accusations, but nobody was listening anymore. Ha-joon's father, who had looked so disappointed earlier, now stood and walked to his son. He helped Ha-joon sit back down in his wheelchair, because standing for so long was still exhausting, and then he did something he hadn't done since before the accident. He hugged Ha-joon tightly and said he was proud of him, proud of his strength, proud of his honesty, and proud of the man he had become. The meeting ended with Ha-joon as the clear winner, but Serah felt sick inside. Yes, Ha-joon had won his position, but at what cost? Everyone now knew their marriage had started as a lie. What if Ha-joon resented her for bringing this embarrassment into his life? What if he regretted ever making that deal in the cafe? As people filed out of the conference room, Serah stood frozen, unsure what to do or say. She felt like she had ruined everything for Ha-joon, even though he had defended her so beautifully. Ha-joon wheeled over to where Serah stood and took her hand. He looked exhausted from standing for so long, and she could see pain in his expression, but his eyes were full of love and reassurance. He told her not to worry, that everything would be okay, that they had survived Jin-woo's attack together and would survive whatever came next. But Serah couldn't shake the guilt eating at her. She said that maybe she should leave, that she had brought too many problems into Ha-joon's life, that he deserved better than a wife who came to him as a broken mess seeking revenge. Ha-joon's grip on her hand tightened, and he said firmly that she wasn't going anywhere, that they were in this together, that her past didn't matter to him because he loved who she was now. Serah wanted to believe him, but doubt had planted itself in her heart like a weed, growing stronger with every passing moment. As they left the building together, Serah made a decision. She would give Ha-joon space to focus on his new responsibilities without the distraction of their complicated situation. She told herself it was for his own good, but really she was just scared. Scared of being hurt again. Scared of not being enough. Scared that Ha-joon's declaration of love was just for show, said to win the vote, not because he truly meant it.
Over the next few days, Serah pulled away from Ha-joon emotionally, even though they still lived in the same house. She stopped joining him for meals, claiming she wasn't hungry. She spent more time alone in her room, avoiding conversations. She didn't kiss him goodnight
or tell him about her day. Ha-joon noticed immediately and tried to talk to her about it, but Serah kept making excuses. She was tired. She didn't feel well. She needed time to think. Ha-joon looked hurt and confused, but he didn't push, respecting her space, even though it was clearly killing him to watch her retreat. Then, on the 5th day of Serah's emotional withdrawal, something happened that forced everything into the open. Marcus showed up at Ha-joon's house. Somehow, Marcus had heard about Ha-joon's wealthy family and Serah's new marriage, probably through social media posts or news coverage of the business meeting. Marcus arrived at the security gate asking to see Serah, claiming he needed to talk to her about something important. The security team called Ha-joon, who was working in his study, and Ha-joon's first instinct was to have Marcus thrown off the property. But then he thought about Serah and her closed-off behavior, and he wondered if maybe she needed closure with her ex-boyfriend to truly move forward. So Ha-joon made a decision that terrified him. He told security to let Marcus in. When Serah heard that Marcus was at the front door asking for her, her first emotion was anger. How dare he show up here after what he did? But then curiosity won over anger. What could Marcus possibly want after all this time? Serah went downstairs to find Marcus standing in the elegant foyer, looking completely out of place in his wrinkled clothes and nervous expression. When Marcus saw Serah, he immediately started talking fast, his words tumbling over each other. He said he had made the biggest mistake of his life by betraying her. He said that things with Monica had fallen apart almost immediately after the failed wedding, that Monica had only wanted him to make Serah jealous and had dumped him 2 weeks later. He said he had been miserable and stupid and realized too late that Serah was the best thing that ever happened to him. Marcus begged Serah to give him another chance, to leave this new husband she barely knew, to come back to him so they could start over and do things right this time. He promised he had changed, promised he would never hurt her again, promised she was the only woman he truly loved. Serah stood there listening to Marcus's desperate speech, and she felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no love, no pain, no temptation. She looked at this man she had once planned to marry, and he seemed like a stranger, someone from a different lifetime that had nothing to do with who she was now. Marcus kept talking, kept begging, but Serah wasn't really listening anymore. Instead, she was thinking about Ha-joon. She was thinking about gentle mornings watching him feed birds in the garden. She was thinking about quiet evenings watching old movies and arguing about their endings. She was thinking about how Ha-joon had created that rooftop garden just to make her smile. She was thinking about how Ha-joon looked at her like she was precious and important, how he listened when she talked, how he supported her dreams without trying to control or change her. She was thinking about how Ha-joon had stood up in that conference room, literally and figuratively, and declared his love for her in front of everyone who mattered in his life. That was real love. That was the kind of love worth fighting for. Marcus's apologies and promises were just empty words from someone who only wanted what he couldn't have anymore. Serah held up her hand to stop Marcus's rambling speech. She told him calmly and clearly that she didn't love him anymore, that she probably never really had, because real love doesn't disappear when tested by betrayal. She said that Marcus had actually done her a favor by showing his true character before they got married and wasted more years together. She said that she had found real love now with Ha-joon, a man who valued and respected her, who saw her as an equal partner, who made her happy in ways Marcus never could. Serah thanked Marcus for coming because his visit had clarified something important for her. She realized that she had been scared and pulling away from Ha-joon, not because she didn't love him, but because she loved him so much it terrified her. She had been protecting herself from potential pain instead of embracing the joy right in front of her. Serah told Marcus to leave and not come back, that this chapter of her life was completely closed. Marcus looked shocked and hurt, but he finally understood that he had lost Serah forever. He left the house defeated, and Serah felt a weight lift off her shoulders as she watched him go. As soon as Marcus was gone, Serah ran to find Ha-joon. She found him in his study, sitting by the window, looking sad and lost. When he saw Serah burst through the door, his expression changed to hope mixed with fear. Serah didn't waste time with explanations or apologies. She ran to Ha-joon and threw her arms around him, hugging him tightly. She told him she was sorry for pulling away, sorry for doubting them, sorry for being scared when she should have been brave. She said that Marcus's visit had made her realize that she didn't want revenge anymore, didn't want a fake marriage anymore, didn't want anything except Ha-joon and the real love they had found together. She said she loved him completely and wanted their marriage to be real in every possible way. Ha-joon hugged her back just as tightly, and Serah felt him shaken slightly. When she pulled back to look at his face, she saw tears on his cheeks, happy tears that matched her own. Ha-joon said he loved her too, that he had been terrified she would choose Marcus, that he couldn't imagine his life without her anymore. They kissed then, a kiss full of relief and joy and promise, and Serah knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged.
Ha-joon's grandmother came to visit the next day, and Serah was nervous about meeting her properly after the dramatic business meeting. But the old woman was kind and warm, welcoming Serah with open arms. She told Serah that she could see the genuine love between her and Ha-joon, that love was precious regardless of how it started, and that Serah had her complete blessing and support. Ha-joon's grandmother also gave Serah a beautiful jade bracelet that had been in the family for generations, saying that it should belong to the woman who had brought light back into Ha-joon's eyes. Serah cried happy tears and promised to honor the family and make Ha-joon happy for the rest of their lives. Ha-joon's father also came around, apologizing for doubting their relationship and welcoming Serah officially into the family. Even some of the family members who had been suspicious at the business meeting reached out to congratulate them and express support. Jin-woo, of course, remained angry and bitter, but his influence had diminished significantly, and most people simply ignored him now. The family was healing, and Serah and Ha-joon were at the center of that healing, showing everyone that love could triumph over adversity when people were brave enough to be honest and vulnerable. 6 months after Marcus's visit and the big confrontation at the business meeting, Ha-joon and Serah decided to have a real wedding ceremony, not because they needed to prove anything to anyone, but because they wanted to celebrate their love properly with the people who mattered. They planned a beautiful ceremony that honored both Korean and African traditions, blending their cultures together in a way that felt authentic and meaningful. Serah wore a stunning dress that mixed traditional Korean hanbok elements with African print fabric in gorgeous colors. Ha-joon wore a tailored suit with a vest made from kente cloth that Serah's family had sent from their home country. The ceremony took place in a garden venue filled with flowers, and both families attended, mixing together and celebrating the love that had brought them all together. Ha-joon's grandmother sat next to Serah's grandmother, and the two old women chatted like they had known each other for years. Serah's mother cried happy tears and told Ha-joon that he better take good care of her daughter or he would answer to her. Ha-joon promised solemnly that he would cherish Serah every single day of his life. The ceremony itself was beautiful and emotional. They exchanged new rings, these ones engraved with their wedding date and the words "from arrangement to forever" in both English and Korean.
They spoke vows they had written themselves, promising to support each other through good times and bad, to laugh together and cry together, to build a life full of love and purpose. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Ha-joon stood up from his wheelchair. He could walk now for short distances, and he wanted to stand for this moment. He pulled Serah close and kissed her, while everyone cheered and clapped. The reception was a joyful celebration, full of food, music, and dancing. Serah danced with Ha-joon, who sat in his wheelchair, and pulled her onto his lap while they swayed to slow music, both of them laughing and crying at the same time. They danced with family members, took 1,000,000 pictures, and celebrated the miracle of finding love when they had both thought it was impossible. As the sun set and fairy lights twinkled overhead, Serah looked around at all the happy faces and felt grateful for every twist and turn that had brought her to this perfect moment. After the wedding, life settled into a beautiful rhythm. Ha-joon took over as CEO of the family company and proved all his doubters wrong by leading with wisdom, innovation, and compassion. Under his leadership, the company grew and thrived, and employees actually enjoyed working there because Ha-joon treated everyone with respect, regardless of their position. Serah finally opened her dream flower shop in a charming neighborhood, and it became immediately popular because of her artistic arrangements and genuine warmth with customers. She hired employees who loved flowers as much as she did, and together they created beauty for weddings, anniversaries, graduations, and all of life's special moments. Sometimes Serah thought about that rainy night when she stood broken in the middle of a crosswalk, and she could hardly believe she was the same person. She had grown so much, healed so deeply, and found happiness she never thought possible. Ha-joon continued his physical therapy and got stronger every month, though he still used his wheelchair sometimes when his legs were tired. He never saw it as a weakness anymore, just part of who he was, and Serah loved every part of him equally.
They adopted a rescue dog from the shelter, a goofy golden retriever they named Lucky, because both Serah and Ha-joon felt incredibly lucky to have found each other. Lucky became their constant companion, joining them in the garden, sleeping at the foot of their bed, and bringing endless joy and laughter into their home. Serah and Ha-joon talked about having children someday, but they weren't in a rush. They were enjoying building their life together, supporting each other's dreams, and simply being happy. They took trips together, exploring new cities and making memories. They had quiet evenings at home, reading books side by side or watching their favorite old movies. They had adventures and routines, excitement and peace, challenges and victories. Their life together was real and imperfect and absolutely beautiful. On their first anniversary, Ha-joon took Serah back to the rooftop garden where they had first admitted their love. The flowers had grown even more beautiful over the year, and Ha-joon had added new varieties that bloomed in different seasons, so the garden was never empty. They sat together under the stars, Serah curled up next to Ha-joon, his arm around her shoulders. Serah said she couldn't believe a whole year had passed, that it felt like both forever and just yesterday at the same time. Ha-joon agreed and said he was grateful for every single day they had shared. Serah looked up at him and said something she had been thinking about a lot lately. She said that she used to think Marcus breaking her heart was the worst thing that ever happened to her, but now she understood it was actually the best thing because it led her to Ha-joon. She said that sometimes terrible things happen, not as punishments, but as redirections, pushing us toward where we're actually supposed to be. Ha-joon kissed her forehead and said that his accident had felt like a curse for so long, but meeting Serah had transformed it into a blessing, because without that rainy night in his wheelchair, they might never have found each other.
They agreed that life was strange and painful and beautiful all at the same time, and the key was to stay open to love even when it seemed impossible. As they sat there in their rooftop garden, the city lights of Seoul twinkling below them, Serah and Ha-joon talked about their future with excitement and hope. They talked about the children they wanted to raise with love and values, about the businesses they wanted to grow, about the family they were building together that mixed cultures and traditions into something uniquely theirs. They talked about growing old together, about being the kind of grandparents who spoiled their grandchildren and told them stories about how their love began with revenge but transformed into something real and lasting. They promised each other that no matter what challenges came their way, they would face them together with honesty and courage and the love that had saved them both. Ha-joon pulled Serah closer and whispered that she was the best thing that ever happened to him, his partner, his love, his home. Serah whispered back that he had taught her to trust again, to love again, to believe in happy endings again. They kissed under the stars, two people who had started as strangers making a deal and had become soulmates, building a lifetime together.